Welcome to the Sharp Angles Betting and DFS Show. My name is Tod Burros, and I am your host, and I am once again reunited with my partner, Ryan McCrystal, who was off last week, and we are going to go over the Thursday night game, Ryan's props for the rest of the week, some DFS ideas, and a look at the early slate for DFS, especially when you consider ownership on a really interesting slate where there are only 10 games, and between a lot of the top priced quarterbacks being off the slate and so many injuries and new quarterbacks, it's going to be a very, very interesting early discussion, especially as it relates to quarterback this week in DFS. But first, while it's no longer spooky season, we want to remind you that you can get access to all our fantasy content, including insights, props, worksheets, and more, by taking advantage of our fantasy packages available on the Sharp Football website. Right now, we're running a special offer for listeners, code ANGLES, for 15% off any fantasy package. The 15% discount also extends to every package site-wide. Check it out in the podcast description or use the code ANGLES during checkout on the purchase page of the Sharp Football website. Also, if you could please subscribe and give thumbs up to our YouTube channel, or if you listen to us via audio podcast, please like and review the podcast, as it really does help us both personally and as a company to deliver great free weekly content. Ryan, I am so glad to see you again, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back. Sorry I missed last week.
It happens. Baby duty?
Exactly.
How old are your kids?
4 and 2. So as you can imagine, sometimes it gets a little crazy around here. And that was the case last week.
Someone told me once that the biggest change in any marriage is when you go from one kid to two, right? Because and we stopped at one. So when it's just one child, you've got the whole dynamic of you and the child. But as soon as you bring a second child in, it adds the whole dynamic of how they get along together. And it's a whole new level of drama, Ryan. And I'm sure you know that quite well.
Yes. Well, you no longer outnumber them when it gets to 2. So it does change everything.
Yep. Well, it's great to have you back. Last week, Ray subbed for you. Why don't you catch us up on how you've been doing with your props?
We're doing great overall, but last week was a good week for me to miss because it was our worst week of the year. We only had one. I believe we went 1 and 3 with the Brian Robinson prop being no action because the line came in lower than I was expecting it to. So a tough week, but hopefully we can bounce back this week.
Awesome. Well, let's start with the Thursday night game. I know a lot of people aren't really excited about this game, but I kind of am. And we can get into that. What is your prop for the Thursday night game?
Yeah, I'm going to take the over on Jaylen Warren's receiving yards. It's available at 19.5. And this is actually one of my props for the week. Like I've mentioned before, a lot of times a Thursday night prop that I give out is just one that, if you want some action on the Thursday night game, it's what I prefer. But this is actually one of my favorite props of the whole week. So I've got some real confidence behind this. The over on his receiving yards is 5 and 2 on the year. So we've got a good track record. And he's actually Pittsburgh's third leading receiver this year. He's got more targets, more receptions, more yards than Allen Robinson, who's been starting every game for them at wide receiver. But Warren is really their third option in the passing game when everyone is healthy. There's really two main reasons why I like this prop. First of all, he's got explosive ability, and this line is only at 19.5 yards. He's got 2 catches this year over 20 yards, so he's got the ability to do it in one catch. He's got 4 catches of at least 15 yards. So he has the ability to get very close or even over with just one catch. He's not going to need a ton of volume to do this, although he does. I mean, it's very reasonable. I believe the over-under on his receptions is 3.5. So it's sort of like if you pair those two numbers, you would certainly think we're in pretty good shape to hit this. The other reason is the Titans defense. They don't blitz a whole lot. They rank 25th in blitz rate at 21%. And like we've talked about before with some other running back props, running backs tend to see more targets without the blitz. So when you have a defense like the Titans, that's a good defensive target for these types of props. And that has played out to an extreme with Warren so far. He has a 17% target share in the Steelers offense on non-blitzes. That drops to 2% versus the blitz. So you were very preferable to play a defense like the Titans if you're targeting any Warren receiving props, because they're not going to blitz a whole lot, most likely. Greatly increases the chances that he sees some catches. If he sees even 3 catches in this game, I think we're in great shape for him to be over on his receiving yards.
Yeah, I like this one too. I might have considered it if you hadn't have taken it. So we are definitely on the same page. For me, last week, I rode what I considered to be a pretty easy Rachaad White over receiving prop to 4-2 overall, which isn't bad for a guy who only does this one prop a week for fun. This week, I'm going to go back to what kind of the way I did it 2 weeks ago when I took Alvin Kamara to be over both rushing and receiving. This week, I'm going to go, Ryan, with Will Levis over 201.5 passing yards and over 10.5 rushing yards. I mean, Pittsburgh is going to put pressure on him at times. That, you only need one scramble out of the pocket to get that 10 yards. Last week, he had 7 carries for 11 yards, which means, as you mentioned in the pregame, he probably had a few quarterback sneaks. But Levis has some pretty good legs. And with the ability for him to hit the deep ball against the beatable Pittsburgh secondary, I am going to go with the over on both of those. Your thoughts?
Rushing yards, I'm with you on that one. That definitely seems like the line, the way to take that one. The passing yards one, that makes me a little bit nervous because he relied on big plays for his yardage last week. He had 3 completions over 30 yards against the Falcons last week. And on his other 26 passes, he only averaged 3.7 yards per attempt. So that was the bulk of their passing offense last week, was those big plays. And the Steelers defense, I think it's going to be a little more challenging. If I were going to play a Levis prop, I think what I would do is bet on him getting one of those big plays, because we know they're going to throw deep. He's got the arm for it. So if I were playing a Levis prop in this game, I would take the over on his longest completion. That's available at 36.5. Not one that I have a ton of confidence.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that one. That's a pretty long pass.
It is. The reason I would play that, though, is because they're going to chuck deep. That's what Levis can do.
Right.
It's the one thing that they know they have confidence in him, is that if they can buy him a little time in the pocket, they know that he can throw deep. That's the strength of his game. So they're going to give him opportunities to do that without question. I think that he's not going to do it enough, though, to get the passing yards.
All right. And I think that is very fair. Again, I am not nearly as deep into these statistics as you are. But I thought that, we've seen just a number of ways for quarterbacks to get over 200 yards. But he certainly has that Zach Wilson 138-yard game in him as well. So I certainly see that. Let's move on to your other props of the week. And there's going to be some people in here that are returning champions. I believe Josh Downs is one of them. You like the receiving over, the receptions over on Josh Downs, correct?
Yeah, going back for a 4th week in a row now, I believe, with Josh Downs, the over on his receptions. Have not seen a line for this yet, but I'll take the over at 4.5 or lower. It hasn't gone above that yet, but he keeps hitting the over. So it's possible it rises. If it did rise to 5.5, I would stay away, just because I have a little bit less confidence this week in what could potentially be a sloppy game against the Panthers. But as long as it stays at 4.5 where it's been recently, and actually, in fact, last week, inexplicably, it was down to 3.5. It dropped. He had a trend of hitting the over at 4.5, and then they dropped it to 3.5 last week, and he doubled that number with 7 catches. So as long as it stays at 3.5 or 4.5, I love it. And as we've talked about in the past, the reason for this is that he's just a great fit for what the offense is with Gardner Minshew. He's seen a 23% target share from Minshew. It was 16% from Anthony Richardson. The reason that trend plays out, it's not necessarily because Minshew likes him more. It's just because Minshew has to get the ball out quicker, whereas Richardson has the ability to hold on to the ball for longer. And with Minshew in the quick passing game, Downs, he's able to get open quickly from the slot. It just works really well for what the offense is with Minshew in there.
All right. I'm on Team Downs, one of my higher owned best ball guys. We're going to skip the guy who's second on the list to go to our other returning hero, the return of TJ Hockenson. And as if you've been following the show, you won't be surprised that Ryan is in favor of the receptions over once again with TJ Hockenson.
Yeah, I'm on the over on his receptions, and I was actually excited to see that it's available at 4.5, which is a drop from where it had been at 5.5 for quite a while. If you listened to us early in the year, we played this prop the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, I think it was, and did pretty well with it. I backed off once Jefferson got injured because a big reason why we played this was because when Jefferson's on the field, teams tend to play a lot of too high safety coverage against the Vikings, basically trying to make it harder for them to throw deep. And I was a little bit concerned that maybe teams would approach them differently because the too high safety coverage, it opens up the middle of the field more. It's the favorable coverage for tight ends. So, I mean, anytime you know that you're going to see a lot of too high coverage, taking over on tight ends receptions is often a good bet, especially with someone who's as involved as Hockenson. The reason I'm back on it this week, there's a couple reasons. The first reason is that too high safety defense expectation. The Falcons, they play that a lot against everybody. So I'm not concerned about them adjusting for Jefferson. They use too high coverage at the third highest rate in the league. 56% of the time they're in too high coverage. So this bodes well, even with a rookie quarterback, even without Jefferson. This bodes well for Hockenson seeing a really high usage. The past 3 weeks without Jefferson on the field, Hockenson has seen a 30% target share versus too high coverage. So if the Falcons are in this half the time or over half the time, he's gonna see a good workload in this game.
Yeah, I can't think of Falcons without seeing Arthur Smith's disgusting mustache, which producer, if you could, Matt, if you could put up our mustache. I mean, if you're going to have a mustache, you want to have the sharp football mustache. All right. Well, anyway, if you're there it is, the sharp football mustache, a manly mustache, not Arthur Smith's mustache. I digress, Ryan. And speaking of the Vikings, let's go with a Hall of a prop.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the over on Jaren Hall's rushing yards. Have not seen a line for this yet. I'll take it at 19.5 or lower. I'm kind of thinking it probably will be available lower than that. And if it's much lower than that, then my confidence goes up a lot. To try to gauge where it might be, I was thinking maybe it would fall in line with where Bryce Young opened the season, because they're very comparable in terms of their physical tools. Smaller quarterbacks, good running ability, not super strong arms. And Young opened the season at 12.5 was his line. So maybe Halls falls in that same range, in which case I would love it because I think he's going to run the ball in this game. One of the reasons for it is just that was a pretty big part of the offense at BYU last year. He averaged 6.2 rush attempts per game, excluding sacks, 32.9 yards per game. He also averaged 2.7 pass attempts on designed rollouts last year. So that's an area where he's comfortable, and being a smaller quarterback, it would make sense for the Vikings to incorporate that into their offense now with him. And anytime you're rolling him out of the pocket, he's already on the move, increases the probability that he takes off running if no one's open or if he sees a lane or whatnot. I also think that expectations are very low for Jaylen Hall. I believe it was a 5th round pick. Based on where the line is and the fact that the Vikings, I believe, are 6-point underdogs or maybe 5.5-point underdogs in this game, the expectation is that their offense is going to take a huge step back. Now, I certainly don't think that he's going to fill in seamlessly for Kirk Cousins. He's still a rookie, but I think he might outperform expectations in this game. I think the Vikings offense might be okay with him. A big reason why Hall fell in the draft last year was he's 25 years old, he's undersized, and he has a long injury history. That's a tough combination. You're not going to gamble on that profile of a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round. But if he were, a 21-year-old healthy quarterback, regardless of his size, given what we've seen from him over the past couple of years, I think he may have gone in that range and expectations would be completely different for him. So in this particular game, we're not worried long-term. The injury history doesn't matter to us. Now he's actually a 25-year-old quarterback with a lot of experience who is probably more NFL ready than a lot of the rookie quarterbacks that we've seen so far this year. And we have seen a lot this season. So I actually think that he might do okay. I think he's probably better suited for stepping in on short notice in this game for the Vikings than a lot of the rookies around the league, and their offense might be okay. So that also plays, going back to the TJ Hockenson prop, that plays into that also. I don't think this offense is going to struggle mightily just because Hall's in there. I think he's capable of, to an extent, picking up where the offense left off with Cousins.
That's a really interesting take, especially as we head into the DFS portion, because his salary is $4,800. It is the wildest week at quarterback that I've ever seen. So I look forward to breaking some of that down in a little bit. I do want to return to something that I should have done, but I didn't do. We do have a big Thursday night game coming up, Ryan. And I neglected to ask you who you thought would win the game.
I think the Titans maybe pull off a mild upset in this matchup. I think that their run defense has been much better. T.R. Tart has been back healthy, and their run defense is completely different without him. So I think they cause some problems for the Steelers offense and win a low scoring game, maybe 17-13 Titans.
All right, I'm going to go against you, and I'm going to go 2017 Steelers. I would not be shocked at all if you were right. But in a game with a new quarterback against a really good pass rush for the most part, I wouldn't be shocked if Will Levis had a decent game that also included a pick six. And I'm just going to slightly go the other way with the Steelers on this one. So I also want to thank Sam Haldeman. I was just about to get to that, for saying that this is a great show. Sam, my greatest quality is my humility. So never mind. Thank you, Sam. That was very nice of you to say. And we really like when you jump in. If you have any other questions, let us know. Let's get back to Ryan's prop. Let's go to another team. Speaking of the Steelers, another team in that division, the Cleveland Browns. Amari Cooper, you have a prop for us, Ryan.
Yeah, I'll probably be on the over on a Cooper's longest reception in this game. Have not seen a line. Actually, haven't seen any props for this game available, most likely because the Cardinals quarterback situation is still kind of up in the air. But I'll take this as long as it's available at 23.5 or lower. I'll be on the over for his longest reception. And it's really all about the Cardinals' terrible defense. They're allowing 2.9 completions per game of 20 or more yards. So really anyone who's consistently used as a deep threat in their offense, you're going to want to look at the longest reception against this Cardinals defense. They just can't defend downfield. On throws of 15 or more yards downfield, they're allowing a 65% completion rate. That's unimaginable. I mean, that's the kind of completion rate you expect to see on short to intermediate throws, not the deep ball, not 15 plus yards downfield. It's unfathomable that they've been this bad, this deep into the season, having a number like that. And so, the Browns, their quarterback situation, I don't believe they've announced who it's going to be for certain yet, but it doesn't really matter to me because they've been terrible against everybody. So, Cooper is really their only deep threat. That he is the targeted receiver on just under 50% of their throws at 15 or more yards downfield. So he's going to see multiple opportunities down the field against this defense because the Browns would just be fools not to challenge this defense as bad as they've been. And I think he's going to catch at least one of them in this game.
All right. So I did forget another thing today. And what's funny is it's the two things I left off the show sheet. Once we put it back on, I still forgot it. You have a prop for a Bear quarterback.
Yeah, Tyson Bagent, I'm going to be on the under on his longest completion against the Saints. They've just been really conservative this year. So this line is available at 31.5, and I'm going to be on the under. The offense, they just really dialed it back with him out there. And it makes sense. He doesn't have a ton of experience against high-level competition, so you don't want to force him to sit in the pocket and read defenses and throw downfield. Only 10% of his passes so far have traveled 15 or more yards downfield. That's the lowest rate in the league. And I think against this Saints defense, you have even more reason to want to be conservative. They're allowing a 28% completion rate at 15 or more yards downfield, and they generate a 10% interception rate on those throws downfield. So they're an opportunistic defense. You don't want Bagent putting the ball in harm's way. So you're going to pick a couple spots where he's going to throw downfield, but I don't think they're going to throw downfield enough that we should be concerned about them completing one of those long passes. He only has one pass of 25 yards or longer through his first 2.5 games in the league. So this is not a very explosive offense with him out there. And against the Saints defense, it looks like a great spot to bet the under here.
Yeah, I like that as well. You're much more likely to get a big play on a DJ Moore screen than you are Tyson Bagent airing it out downfield. But I definitely like that. Before we move on to DFS, though, we do have a question in the chat. Josh asked, would you trade Aaron Jones and Rondale Moore for Josh Jacobs in a 20-man PPR? So I'll ask you this, Josh, because to me, Rondale Moore is a borderline starting guy, right? There's not too many weeks where you're going to start Rondale Moore, right? You can pick up a guy on waivers for Rondale Moore. So the question then comes, do you like Josh Jacobs or Aaron Jones more? And for me, especially with Josh McDaniels being let go, I think you're going to see the Raiders open up the offense a little with Aiden O'Connell. I think you're going to see Josh Jacobs, I think, had a 22%. Can't believe I knew that off the top of my head, Ryan. But I saw that today. I think he had a 22% target rate, the one game that Aiden O'Connell played. For me, we normally don't take these kind of questions, but I thought this one would be fun. Because it's important when you do trades not to account for value where there really isn't value. And I don't see Rondale Moore adding any value to Aaron Jones. Give me Josh Jacobs. Ryan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with that. It being a 20-man league, that makes it a little bit more complicated. It changes the dynamics, obviously, of what about maybe Rondale Moore has a little more. I mean, he certainly would have a little bit.
I think that meant 20, not start 20. I thought that meant
20 teams in the league was what
20 teams.
And maybe I'm wrong, but that was my assumption. So that would give Rondale Moore a little bit of value, I would think. But he says that Rondale Moore's on his bench, so obviously he's okay.
Yeah, 20 teams, it gives Rondale a little bit of value.
Yeah.
But I still kind of lean towards the Jacobs.
Yeah, I would still lean towards Jacobs, especially because he could become even more involved in the run game. I would expect Antonio Pierce to have a pretty conservative, old school mindset as the new Raiders coach. And obviously he's not running the offense, but they've got a completely inexperienced offensive coordinator. So, Pierce is still going to have some say in the general direction of the offense, I would think.
Something I said about Josh Jacobs during best ball season was that, I tend to avoid these guys who sit out right until camp start, right until the season starts. They always seem to start slow. And Jacobs did. He looked really pretty good last week. And even the week before, he looked better than he had. We saw Josh Jacobs be one of the top running backs in the league last year, win a lot of people money. And Aaron Jones also has that hamstring injury. And, we all know how easy it is for those to get tweaked again. Ryan and I are on the same page, but thank you, Josh, for the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Definitely on the same page there. We've wrapped up all my props. Let's move over to the DFS stuff, and let's start with quarterback, where we've got Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, all on buys this week. So our options are pretty limited. So Todd, what do you make of the mess at quarterback this week?
Yeah, and then you've also got the Tua and there's that Germany game has two quarterbacks. The Sunday and Monday games have good. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of new quarterbacks this week. So there's more guesswork than I can ever remember. But I'm going to bring Aiden O'Connell back. Right now, he is the best value in projections. And we all know how hungry Devontae Adams is right now. We saw CeeDee Lamb completely go nuts last week in a very similar spot. I do think there's something to these alpha wide receivers being unhappy that leads teams to feed them to keep them happy. And you couldn't have had a clearer signal from ownership all the way on down that it wasn't acceptable. So, the Giants D, though, has been a little better, and cornerback Deion Clamps Banks is holding receivers to a 50% completion. But, there's very, very few people like Devontae Adams. So I am going to be on Aiden O'Connell. In that same game, Daniel Jones is the next highest value and the highest, second or third highest owned quarterback right now on the week. And that is a big, big, big no for me. I don't care how bad the Raiders have been. The Giants offense has been worse. And then you've got that neck injury. And I am not going to play that. Another higher owned quarterback at 10% is Baker Mayfield. Again, not the type of guy I want to play into ownership. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the Tampa receivers later. I think if you're going to play the Tampa receivers, you don't need Baker this week at 10% ownership. Bryce Young, 5,100 at 5% ownership, has been playing better. And you would have made a lot of money this year if every week you played against the Redskins. There, I did it again. The Commanders. And I know it will probably bite me, but Taylor Heineke at 5K with 2% ownership. It looks like Drake London might miss. So you're going to have a very tight distribution with Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. I am very interested in Heineke. On the higher end, Hurts has 15% ownership at 8K against the good Cowboy D. That's not too thrilling to me. I think if, it wasn't a week where we didn't have a lot of high-end options, and Lamar at 10% versus a tough Seattle defense. If I'm going to play someone semi-high or in that Philadelphia game, Ryan, give me Dak Prescott at 6,500. His ownership is right around 5%. I think it's going to rise. I think that people are going to figure this out, but the Eagles are much more likely to be beat in passing. Dak seems to be getting hot. They might be figuring it out a little bit. Those are my overall thoughts at the quarterback position, Ryan.
Yeah, your thoughts on Dak make a lot of sense. That's one of the only games with two competent offenses, so it's one of the only opportunities for a shootout. So certainly you could justify targeting either quarterback there. I like Aiden O'Connell. I think we talked about him a couple of weeks ago that I was relatively high on him as a draft prospect. I said that if a Brock Purdy emerges from this class, which of course is a big if, but if it does, he would be my pick. He's accurate to all levels of the field. If you build a good offense around someone like that, he can be serviceable. I just have some doubts as to whether or not this offense is going to be.
They don't have a good
anywhere close to competent.
And
it wasn't,
and he doesn't handle pressure well. I've got a tremendous amount of him down the stretch in both weekly winners and in regular best ball in 20 round. I thought he was just a great play. And weekly winners now, all I need is 1 week for him to be the top scoring quarterback. And, there's only going to be just a fraction of teams that have him rostered. So I'm really excited about O'Connell. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries. Yeah, my biggest, I like him. Maybe it works out. He's got Adams on his side, obviously, but what a wildly inexperienced staff he's got running his offense now.
Oh my gosh.
With Antonio Pierce leading the charge and offensive coordinator Bo Hardegree, who knows? We don't know much about Hardegree. Maybe he'll be
We don't know much of his pedigree of Hardegree.
Yeah, he hasn't been in a position like this before, and limited experience even as a position coach. So who knows what that'll look like. I like your take on Heineke too. I mean, a very low floor, of course, but he takes more shots downfield than Ritter does. He's aggressive, which can backfire. He could throw 2 or 3 picks, certainly, but on any given week, he could certainly put up a big number. So in DFS, I think, as long as he's starting, and the salary is low, he's someone to keep in the back of your mind to potentially target, just because he's going to take more shots than Ritter did, I would have to assume.
If Drake London is healthy, I'm going to play a lot of Heineke with Drake London, who's most likely to take advantage of those longer shots. If London is out, normally you don't play the quarterback with the running back unless the running back is a great receiver. Bijan Robinson can make a couple guys miss and get a 70-yard touchdown on any pass. I am very likely to pay Heineke with one of the tight ends and Bijan if I do end up going with Heineke and London misses, Ryan.
Yeah, it makes sense. Bijan is certainly one of the running backs out there that you could pair with his quarterback. So since you've already brought up some running backs, let's go over there. Obviously, we've got better options. In fact, quite a few good options at running back this week. So sort through the chalk for us. What do you see as good chalk this week?
I wish I had answers at this point, but it's going to take a lot more study than what a Thursday would reveal to me. Right now, there are 8 running backs with 20% ownership on a 10-game slate. Jacobs, Bijan, Hubbard, Jonathan Taylor, Pollard, Ramondre, Kamara, and Rashad White. Jacobs is the best value right now, and Hubbard is the next highest value and is kind of the low price guy. Kamara, we've seen his salary get back up to $8,200. So basically, none of these guys jump out at me as bad chalk, but none of them jump out as good chalk. So let's spend the rest of the time at running back looking at some other options. I did have some interest in DeMarcado at 4,700, but I read something today that kind of scared me off that a little. I wish I could remember what it was. But I like DeAndre Swift. We've seen the Cowboys get run on, and we know how just amazing that pass rush can be. Even with a good line, it would not shock me to see DeAndre Swift have a good game. There are not a lot of great cheap guys, but Darrell Henderson, he had a very tough matchup last week. The Packers are not nearly as good. And if Matt Stafford misses or plays and is limited, I think the running game will be a lot more on the table. He's a touchdown-dependent guy. But right now at 2% ownership, I mean, that's a guy I'm going to want to be over on. The next guy I drafted almost none of. It's one of my best fades of the year, Alexander Mattison. But with Kirk Cousins out, again, very similar. Teams are much more likely to run the ball. Mattison isn't good, but he's got no ownership and a low salary. Those are 2 things that I'm always interested in. 2 other really low salary guys that I'm interested in going deeper on is Roshan at 4,500 and Zach Charbonnet at 4,300. And then there's one guy, Dameon Pierce, has missed 2 games. He'll join the chalk brigade, but Devin Singletary, he will be chalky, Ryan, I think, if Pierce misses this week.
Yes, if Pierce is out, Singletary feels like bad chalk to me, because I'm not sure that there have been too many opportunities where he has been good chalk. I feel like he has had many opportunities in his career where he looks like a value and he consistently disappoints from the fantasy perspective.
And then does well when you're not expecting.
Of course, yeah. Of the guys you mentioned in the chalk portion of what you were saying, Jacobs stands out to me as a guy to target. I sort of already mentioned it, but Pierce, that could turn into a very old school, very run heavy offense. If he sees like 25 carries this week, that wouldn't shock me at all. They could just decide to change the direction of the offense, really lean heavily into him. And if he sees a big workload, he doesn't even necessarily need to be extremely effective. 25 carries with, he's going to get 80 or so yards at a minimum. And if he scores a touchdown, he's going to have a decent number for you. DeMarcado you mentioned, that's one that I would stay away from because I don't know. Obviously, he's going to have a hard time running the ball against the Browns because basically everybody does. And I don't know that he's going to play a huge role in the passing game. If Clayton Tune, if I can't remember if he's been officially announced as a starter yet, but it sounds like we're leaning towards that being the case. And he, in college, he is an aggressive downfield passer. He will take shots all day long downfield, and that can burn him at times. But he's not afraid to throw downfield. So if they throw him into the fire in this game, he's going to take shots. I don't think he's going to be one of these rookies that's just trying to dink and dunk and survive his first game. I think he's going to come out guns blazing. And so DeMercado, who already doesn't play, we haven't seen him play a big role in the passing game so far. I don't think that he would necessarily get a boost from Tune in this spot. So that would be one I'd stay away from.
If I understand you correctly, what you were just saying is, and maybe that's what I read about how good the Browns are against the run again. I know something got in my head that I'm no longer. I just know that last week when I watched the game, it seemed like every play I would watch, it would be him with the ball. And he got 20 carries. So I agree with you. But if I understood you correctly, you're not on him. But how would you feel about the other running back in that game at 5% ownership at 5,300? Jerome Ford is a little bit of a tweener and a scary click. I would be interested in your thoughts, Ryan.
I would say if you're building a lot of lineups, having a little bit of any running back going against the Cardinals is probably a good opportunity. Like you want to have exposure to the Cardinals defense across the board, right? But given the way the Browns have split up carries, it's tough to go too heavy on any of those running backs in any given week because it just, is he going to see more than 10 carries? I don't think you could have any confidence that either he or Hunt is going to see enough of a workload to put up a huge number. So I wouldn't go too heavy on that.
Yeah, I didn't put him on the list for that reason, but I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yep. All right, that wraps up running backs. Let's move on to the wide receivers. Who are you targeting in this area?
Well, I don't know. Again, it's a tough week, but before I get into my thoughts at wide receiver, I want to remind people that even though Halloween is over and the big discount we offer is over, I want to remind you that, we always think about you here at Sharp Football Analysis. We want you to have access to all our fantasy content, including our insights, our props, Rich Rebar's amazing worksheets. By taking advantage of our fantasy packages available on the Sharp Football website. Right now, we're running a special offer for listeners with the code ANGLES for 15% off any fantasy package. The 15% discount also extends to every package site-wide. Check it out in the podcast description or use the code ANGLES during checkout on the purchase page of the Sharp Football website. So, Ryan, we got Demario Douglas is the latest in curious chalk choices. 4,025% ownership. I can't think of a bigger no to me. I know that Mac Jones and the Patriots have a great matchup, but Mac Jones has the ability to not do anything in a good matchup. And then you just never know who's going to catch the ball in that offense. I am not playing a chalk $4,000 Demario Douglas very often unless I somehow decide to do some Mac Jones lineups. If you want another cheap guy that I think has started to come on, it's rookie Jonathan Mingo. His salary is less than Douglas, and he has less than half the ownership. And that's a guy I'm going to look into a little bit deeper, maybe watch that game again from last week, because he did have 10 fantasy points last week. If you're going up top, neither Kupp nor Adams has more than 12% ownership right now. And I get it why there's reasons why they might not do it. But boy, do I like betting on talent. especially Adams this week. And Ryan had the prop. I have Amari Cooper at low ownership, 6,200 against that Cardinals defense. And I also mentioned Baker Mayfield as a no at 10% ownership, but Mike Evans at 6% at 7,300 and 3% at 7K ownership for Chris Godwin are both very interesting guys who can get there without Baker Mayfield giving you a score that you need to have. I would consider both of them, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm certainly with you on Cooper, since I talked about that in the props section. You got to have exposure to that Cardinals defense. Big game potential for sure. I'm also with you on fading Douglas. He led the Patriots in targets last week, but 25 yards, and that makes sense. Like he's that type of receiver that's going to see a lot of short passes in the screen game. So you're hoping that this inexperienced receiver breaks a big play. And given that he's like a smaller slot receiver type of guy, he's not going to be a big factor in the red zone. So for him to get a touchdown, you're going to need it to be one of those big plays. It just seems like a long shot, and especially with it being a chalky play, I'm with you. That seems like one to avoid, unless maybe you are playing a Mac Jones lineup for some reason. The other one that I'll throw out that you didn't mention is Marquise Brown, especially if Tune plays. I mentioned that he likes to throw deep and he's aggressive. The Browns defense is really good, but they are a very, very man-heavy defense. So Marquise Brown is going to be in some one-on-one matchups, and with Tune liking to throw deep, who knows? Maybe they hit on a big play. That, especially, I would assume that his roster share would be very low given the defensive matchup. If that is the case, that could potentially be someone to target.
I love it. 5,400 right now with less than 1% ownership on Marquise Brown. Great call. Great call.
Yeah, definitely has big play potential in that game. So with that kind of roster share,
and I love plays where you could go 7% ownership and have 6-7 times the field.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, let's move on to tight ends. Who do you got for us?
Well, I want to start out with a rare mea culpa on what I may have said last week. I feel bad that I passed on Trey McBride. It's so hard when you get in the habit of fading these cheap tight ends who are chalky. And he was 29-30% chalk last week. But at 2,800 with Zach Ertz out and a quarterback who had thrown the ball to the tight end a lot, I should have been at least even weight on Trey McBride. So that's my mea culpa for the week. As for this week, we have almost 25% ownership on TJ Hockenson. So I understand, 5,200, but there's a lot of salary this week. I don't know that I want to put, fight 25% ownership on TJ Hockenson with a rookie quarterback. That seems to me to be a position to be under on. And I know the matchup with Seattle isn't great for tight ends, but Mark Andrews being 1,600 more with a fifth of the ownership of TJ Hockenson. Mark Andrews is talented enough to beat any matchup. I'm much more likely to go 12% Andrews versus 5 than I am to fight that 25% ownership on TJ Hockenson. A few other 10% owned guys out there, none of which stand out to me as great plays. Again, on a week where you only have 10 games, you're going to have chalk end up on players who really don't separate much from the others. So a couple low-owned guys that I think are interesting. I think Daniel Bellinger at 2,500 and no ownership is very interesting, especially if Daniel Jones has that neck thing and they want him to get the ball out quick. I could see Bellinger getting 5 catches for 25 yards, and then if he trips and falls into the end zone at 2,500, you're loving life. If I'm gonna play Mac Jones or someone on the Patriots, Hunter Henry at very low low 3 salary and 1% ownership against Washington seems like a pretty good play to me early in the week. And Jonnu and Pitts bastardize each other a bit, but right now less than 3% ownership, and we've talked about Taylor Heineke a lot on this show. Those are some guys I'll look at more deeply as we move forward, Ryan. And I do want to remind everyone that if you can't find a bunch of tight ends that you like in a given week, it's always good to game stack your tight end with the quarterback, whether it's the quarterback who you're playing or as a bring back. Now, typically, I won't use them as the only guy. So I'm not going to, in the example of Taylor Heineke, right? Well, no, that's not a good example. Give me a second. I'll give you one. Because I think this is an important point.
Sure. Well, while you're looking for one thing I'll say as far as pairing quarterbacks and tight ends, the one area where I would caution against that this week, especially with Hockenson being such high roster share this week, I could see people wanting to sort of justify spending up for Hockenson by also rostering Jaren Hall at quarterback. Since obviously he has a much lower salary. I would caution against doing that, because I think if you're rostering Hall, one of the things you're hoping for is him to produce in the run game and maybe even give you a rushing touchdown. And so if you get down near the goal line, sort of caught in this situation where what you would really like is that rushing touchdown from Hall, but you also want him to throw to Hockenson. And sort of, I think they sort of cancel each other out in value that way. So if you are rostering Hockenson, I wouldn't necessarily say you want to do a lot of pairing him with Hall in that case.
I think that's fair. So, or if you do, add another person to that stack, right? Add an Osborne, add an Addison, so that you are differentiating. Here's the best example. Right now, Baker Mayfield has 10% ownership. Cade Otton only has 1.6. You could say, well, Todd told me to match up the tight end with a quarterback in that game. Well, yes, but you're not going to win a GPP with Baker Mayfield and Cade Otton. So you definitely want to have Baker Mayfield with either of Godwin and Evans, and then possibly in some of those lineups, throw in Cade Otton. Because if Baker Mayfield throws for 4 touchdowns, 2 of them to the main wide receiver you're stacking, and Otton gets 3 for 30 and a touchdown, you're going to be way ahead of the game, but you don't want them to be either the main guy in your stack or the main bring back. I don't mind bringing back 2 players in certain situations. So in that situation, like if I had CJ Stroud and I decided that I was going to go Stroud with Nico Collins and bring back Mike Evans, I wouldn't mind throwing Otton into that one again, because on a week like this, you're only really looking for a couple catches and a touchdown. That's how you do this kind of thing at tight end, Ryan.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. As for the other tight ends, like you mentioned, Trey McBride, I just wanted to mention that this is, if you think he's going to build off last week, I would say that's probably not going to happen in this matchup against the Browns. I mentioned when we were talking about TJ Hockenson earlier, how you want too high coverage when you're playing tight ends. No one does it less than the Browns. 18% of the time they're in too high coverage. That means they're in a lot of single high coverage. The middle of the field is more crowded, less opportunities for tight ends. You want to target outside receivers in that situation, like Marquise Brown, who I mentioned earlier. Also, you mentioned Daniel Bellinger. I really like Bellinger as a prospect. I think he's capable of producing if he gets opportunities. So yeah, anytime we think that he might get a little bit more usage, I think on a low
Waller's
salary.
out. I forgot to mention the thought behind it, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime he's in a situation like that where we think there's a chance for him to get more usage, I think he's capable of taking advantage of that opportunity. So it's worth a shot this week.
Awesome. Follow Ryan on Twitter. He is an extremely bright guy. At Ryan_McCrystal. You can find me at Best Ball NFL. And Ryan and I hopefully will both be back next week for the next edition of the Sharp Football Betting and Prop Show. Ryan, it was a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Todd.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week.